everyone. I wanted to discuss with you sidechain compression. Now, I know we've looked at this before where we took some white noise. We created white noise in Retrolog. We used an audio kick drum. So every time the kick drum hit, it made the white noise duck in volume. So it took the dynamics of the white noise and suppressed it down. So every time you got that EDME pumping sound. So it sounded like it was coming in and out of the mix. Now what I wanted to do is discuss that perhaps more subtly, and also Cubase has got a much more streamlined way of working this out now. It's set up, it's still the same routing way, but it does a lot of the hard work for us. Now the reason I wanted to look at it in a more subtle way as well is because, you know, when we looked at EQ a couple of days ago, we were talking about the dynamic range and certain instruments that share that dynamic range. So say a bass guitar and a kick drum is a classic. So say they're fundamental, the loudest part of each one of those instruments is at 100 Hertz. That's where the peak of each one is. You could perhaps choose the kick drum to be the most prominent, certainly for the initial attack, the first part of that signal. So every time the kick drum hit, it would just take a couple of dB off the bass guitar. So the kick drum would be the most prominent sounding one and help to unclutter the mix. Now, the way we're going to do that, if I just right click here in this left zone, I'm going to add an instrument track. I'm going to choose a synth, and we may as well choose Retrolog as we did before. So I've right clicked, add an instrument track, and Retrolog comes up. Now we can use those edit instrument buttons, or we can use the new shortcut that we did a couple of days ago. So the / key we set up. Okay, this brings up Retrolog. I can now use one of these presets. I'm clicking in this black area here for our presets, and then I'm going to choose, well, I've already written in bass guitar here, or bass, and it's on something called deep seated bass, so I'll just click on it, may as well. I'm not too worried how the instrument sounds. Okay, now I've set a left and right locator from beat 1 all the way to the end of beat 4, so from bar 1 to 2, and I double click in that area. This makes us a blank canvas in order to write the instrument in on the piano roll. So I double click again, bring up the piano roll, and then I can use this button here, which takes me to the full screen. Now, if I just choose, say, C2, I'll right click, get the draw tooler, and just draw in from beat 1 all the way for that bar. Now, once I come out of these, we've got our bass guitar. Now we need the kick drum to be the trigger here, so again we're going to right click, add instrument track, and instead of Retrolog, I'm going to go to our drum menu. I'm going to choose Groove Agent, and then OK. This brings up Groove Agent, and again we've got these edit instruments, but we can use the / key for that. So /, and we've got no sound. This is our sort of a drum sampler in Cubase. But the same process, we can go up here to our presets, and the last kit I was on was a vintage kit, so we'll click on it. There's no reason not to. Okay, there's our kick drum at C1. You see these are the notes for the triggers if you're playing a keyboard. So C1, let me just bring the volume up so you can hear that. Okay, so there's our kick. And I'm going to use the same process here. I'm double click, that makes an editable region, and then double click again, which brings up the piano roll. Now, it was C1, the kick drum. So I'll scroll down to C1. Well, that is quite loud now, so there's our kick. Okay, now, one thing to look out for here is to check you've got snap on. This function, J is the shortcut key for it, but once you've got snap on, we're going to be working. If it was on 1-1, you'd only, every time you click in here, wherever you clicked, it would only snap to the first beat of the bar. But we're working to 1/4s, so now, every time I click, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So I've got C1, I know that's the kick, and because I've got it on quarters, I can put it 1, 2, 3, 4, each one on its own beat. So now, we've got a kick drum and we've got a bass. So it's time to set up the sidechain. So if I go back to Retrolog, click on the E for edit, that's editing channel settings, and then I go to my inserts. Now, compressor or sidechain compression is a dynamic effect, so I go to dynamic effects on my menu, and I go to Cubase's standard compressor, which is called Compressor. And again, I click E to edit this. And here's our compressor. Now, here's the sidechain button. This is the most important button that we use when we're talking about sidechain, and we activate sidechain. Now, at this stage, before in older versions of Cubase, you then had to go to your drum send and set it up. But here, can you see it's doing the hard work for us? It's saying, on this drop down, set up a sidechain input. I'm going to add a sidechain input. And you see here, it's only given me an option of one because I've only got one other instrument set up, which is Groove Agent. If you had quite an extensive mix, say with 20 instruments, all of them would list here. So, but I've only got one, so Groove Agent's going to be my sidechain. So now when I press spacebar, every time the kick hits, it's reducing the gain slightly on my bass guitar. Now, you can use the threshold or bring this down, and you can really emphasize that. So now every time the kick hits, change the release times, and just experiment with finding the sound you like. But quite often, if we're looking at making this more subtle, so let's just bring that down. So every time the kick hits now, I'm getting about 5 dB of gain reduction, but you can see it's then releasing it in between, so the kick drum's coming back. So that's sidechain compression. Now, one thing you'll see when producers work and people are working, they don't always want the kick to be audible. So say you've got a breakdown section and there's no drums in that section, but you still want that pumping effect. What you have to do is, there's two ways of doing it. Well, there's a couple of ways of doing this, but the quickest way I've found is if you go to your mixer, and you can see here, Groove Agent, this is our drums, and at the moment we're going to a stereo out. If we just take that to a no bus at the top, so you see in our route, this is our routing that's going, all of them at the moment are going here to our stereo out. But as soon as we set that to no bus, the audio is no longer travelling out to the stereo out. So, but it's still working as a trigger. So now, if I go back to my edit channel, and bring this down, you can still see the compressor is still working as a sidechain. The kick's still triggering that sidechain, but because I've set the outputs not go anywhere, there's no output bus. There's no sound from the kick. And quite often when you see artists working, they will set up throughout the whole track, perhaps at the top, something they'll call their sidechain channel or sidechain track, and it won't have an output, but every time they put some information in there, you'll get that ducking sound without actually hearing the kick. So they'll have other kicks in the mix and just the sidechain purely as no output. Okay, I hope that helps.